What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, May 12th, 2021, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pow on a Friday, and whatever else insanity is in store for the rest of this week. We have a lot to talk about today. It's been a very busy news day. There's a lot going on. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials and keeping us out of trouble. And we're going to do news until we run out of news, and then we're going to open up the phone lines for your comments, questions, observations, and opinions. So let's get right on into it. First of all, a little bit of good news. Liz Cheney is out. Earlier today, the House Republicans voted to remove Liz Cheney from her leadership position, and it's seen as a move that cements Donald Trump's hold on the Republican Party. And Liz Cheney made a few choice words on her way from being the number 3 GOP representative in the House to being just an ordinary GOP representative, vowing to never allow Donald Trump anywhere near the Oval Office again. And so the venom was definitely out. Donald Trump responded saying that she's a bitter, horrible human being, and he was celebrating the ousting of Liz Cheney. He says he looks forward to watching her as a paid contributor on CNN. So he's got a very low opinion of her there. Now, Joe Biden hosted Kevin McCarthy and other congressional leaders to discuss areas of mutual agreement immediately after Liz Cheney was removed from her leadership position over her refusal to support Donald Trump's claims that the November election was not exactly on the up and up. Another story, this one is coming out of Madness Hub. More than 100 Republicans will sign a letter tomorrow declaring that if the Republican Party does not break with former President Donald Trump, they will form a third party and just go on out and do their own thing. They're saying the GOP is broken. It's time for a resistance. And it is amazing the animosity that has been built against Donald Trump, even among Republicans. And you kind of have to wonder what's really going on with that. Story coming out of Business Insider and a couple of other places. More than 120 retired generals and admirals wrote to Joe Biden suggesting he was not legitimately elected. And on top of that, they're questioning his mental health. Well, my goodness, they're right on top of things here. The group calls themselves Flag Officers for America, and the letter questioned the 2020 election results and Joe Biden's physical and mental well-being. So this may be the beginning of a pushback on the fake elections coming from within retired military. Now, over in Antrim County, Michigan, and by the way, I'm going to preface this by saying that the Secretary of State of Michigan just this afternoon released a statement that experts have confirmed that everything was on the up and up in Antrim County. They're getting desperate over there. So a lawyer, Matthew DePerno, said that they had discovered a MySQL program installed on the machines that could have been used to manipulate the vote totals. And DePerno just a day earlier confirmed in a court hearing there were 1,061 phantom votes in the county during the 2020 presidential election because while a recount of ballots tallied 15,962, the Michigan Secretary of State's database showed only 14,901. Now, the other bombshell that he delivered was that all of the voting machines were connected to each other through an intranet. The intranet itself was not connected to the internet. However, during election night counting, it has come on out, there was a laptop that was plugged into the intranet and did have access to the internet, and it was left on during the election night counting. So it was possible for somebody outside to come in through the internet, through the laptop, through the intranet, and activate this already installed software to change the vote totals. Now, Donald Trump is out there saying the United States should follow the lead of the United Kingdom and demand voter ID to eliminate corruption and fraud in elections. And I absolutely agree. If somebody is really incapable of getting a photo ID, they probably shouldn't be allowed to vote anyway. Mitch McConnell, pardon me, yesterday in a speech before the Senate Rules Committee, Mitch McConnell blasted the so-called For the People Act, basically saying the Democrats are trying to hotwire democracy. And he's absolutely right. This is an attempt to establish in law the very mechanisms by which they stole last November's elections. Meanwhile, 69 members of Congress are asking the Senate not to confirm David Chipman as head of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau. And that would be a really good thing because he is an anti-Second Amendment, a gun grabber. It's definitely a bad idea if he gets confirmed here. All right, let's talk about what's going on in Israel and Palestine because it is very, very intense over there. The United Nations is warning this could turn into a full-scale war. And this is an opinion shared by Andrei Bierstritsky, as interviewed in TASS yesterday. And he's saying the situation is not a simple one. The latest spiral of Arab-Israeli confrontation could develop into a full-scale war. And there's airstrikes going on. There's been something like over 1,000 missiles fired by the Palestinians into Israel. And surprise, surprise, Iron Dome is not able to knock them all down. Israel is claiming that Iron Dome is getting about 80% of them, but I imagine that may be an exaggeration as well. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu has declared a state of emergency in Lod after the city's mayor warns civil war has erupted. Netanyahu is calling for troops to be deployed, and he's comparing it to Kristallnacht under the Nazis. We knew sooner or later that was going to be dragged on in here. 2 senior Hamas intelligence chiefs were killed by Israeli tanks that are lining up on the Gaza border. Netanyahu is warning militants will pay a very heavy price for the rockets fired at Tel Aviv, some of which scored direct hits, according to reports. As of the report that I'm looking at, 36 Palestinians were dead, including 10 children. 5 Israelis are dead. So the bodies are starting to pile up over there. Story out of Middle Eastern Eye. Israel is mobilizing thousands of troops toward Gaza as the death toll mounts, and I expect that this is going to be Israel's opportunity to retake possession of Gaza and make it part of Israel again. Story coming on out of Blacklisted News talking about how phone cameras and access to the internet is undermining Israel's narrative as to what is going on. And they're talking about all the Palestinians, including 9 children who were killed, with the help of United States funding to the tune of $3.8 billion a year. Now, remember, the U.S. loves Muslims and just wants to protect their human rights as long as they're in this country competing for our jobs. But as far as Muslims are concerned in Israel, that's a whole nother thing. And the United States is refusing to condemn Israeli airstrikes that killed Palestinian children. We reported yesterday how the United States blocked a resolution by the United Nations Security Council, condemning Israel's actions and calling for restraint on both sides. And the conflict is not confined to Israel and Palestine. Anti-Israel protests broke out all around the world. The protests are in support of the Palestinians. And thousands in New York, Washington, D.C., London, Istanbul, and other major cities around the globe have taken to the streets to show their support for Palestine. Over in New York City, Palestinian supporters got into a fight with Israeli supporters outside the New York City Israeli consulate. And police had to restrain the Palestinian supporters trying to keep the peace. Now, as just before we went to air, we got this story coming out of Israel's Channel 12 and quoted by Zero Hedge that Hamas has offered a ceasefire on a mutual basis, meaning they will quit if Israel quits. And I don't think that's going to happen because I think Israel sees an opportunity, as I said before, to reclaim Gaza and, really just pound the heck out of the Palestinian people with the tacit blessing of the United States government. Okay, turning on over to the pipeline problem, the Colonial Pipeline. Cybersecurity experts are condemning the White House for breaking with the FBI and suggesting that private companies should just go ahead and pay ransomware demands. And, this is contrary to normal policy where you don't negotiate with terrorists, you don't negotiate with kidnappers. And the White House is saying, I'll just go ahead and pay them the money and keep things working. But, you go ahead and pay the ransomware people money, and there'll be more ransomware coming down in the future. So Florida, Virginia, Georgia, and North Carolina have declared states of emergency over the gas shortages after the Colonial Pipeline hack. 1,000 fuel stations have run dry in the Southeast. People are now panic buying. It's getting so ridiculous they actually had to put out a public service announcement saying, do not store gasoline in plastic bags, which is something that you think people would understand you can't do, but apparently it's been a real problem. So you have these states declaring emergencies, you have pumps running out of gas. The White House insists there is no actual gasoline shortage. It's all the fault of the hoarders. And motorists and even airlines are struggling to find fuel across the southeastern U.S. due to the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack, but the Biden administration denies there is a shortage and says that hoarders are to blame for the supply crunch. And gasoline panic buying is sweeping across the U.S. Prices are soaring. Panic buying has sent U.S. gasoline prices to nearly a 7-year high. Some gas stations are putting rationing in place, saying that you can only buy $50 worth of gas per stop. This has prompted literally fistfights at the pumps for people wanting to make sure their cars are topped off. And so it's getting ugly out there. I mean, fears of a gas shortage are leading to an actual gas shortage. Now, here's a story. This is coming on out from Tethasta.com saying the gas pipeline is reportedly still days away from reopening as the gas stations are running dry. And this is followed up by another article from Station Gossip saying, why is it taking so long to reopen the Colonial Pipeline? Well, part of it is the sheer volume of gas in the pipeline. It's not like you can turn it on and off like your kitchen faucet. It has to be brought up to speed slowly. And so they're working on it. They've got 1 of 4 lines running under manual control right now. Getting into corporate media, over at CNN, their ratings are in a free fall. The network has lost 2/3 of their audience. Over at the National Basketball Association, their ratings are in the gutter. with the regular season coming to a close, and it has all to do with that taking the knee for the anthem. And according to Sports Business Journal, NBA games broadcast on ESPN, ABC, and TNT averaged only 1.4 million viewers. That is a staggering 13% decline from last season, which was already seeing the numbers slipping in a huge, huge way. People go to movies and sporting events to be entertained, not to be lectured at about woke philosophy. Over at Ellen DeGeneres, her show is coming to an end after 19 seasons. The ratings have plummeted, in part due to allegations of her bullying and a toxic work environment on set. And Ellen is expected to make the announcement soon that she has had enough and that she is done. So goodbye, Ellen. We'll see you later. All right, let's talk about COVID-19. And the fear-mongering is still going on. This is coming out of Daily Mail in Great Britain. Could the spread of the Indian variant jeopardize the plans to ease the lockdown? See, there are people who still think locking us all down is a really, really good idea. They just need to convince us that there's a reasonable reason for us to do so, and the new Indian variant may be it. That strain is now dominant in 4 areas where cases have soared by up to 93% in a week, as Minister warns tiered restrictions are still on the cards amid rise of hotspots in the north. So they're pushing back for lockdowns and social distancing and masks and the rest of it. Over in Norway, their health agency is recommending a ban on the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine due to the high number of blood clots that appear to be linked to that vaccine. Down in Australia, a woman has died from blood clots days after getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. And all of this feeds into this next article that came out of LifeSite News. And we've been telling you this for a long time. Big Pharma does not want healthy people. It wants customers, especially repeat customers. And, it should be obvious at this point that the global medical establishment, what I like to call the medical industrial complex, not only rejects but detests that the human body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. And the pressure being put on every man, woman, and now child to get the COVID vaccine is an all-out assault on our humanity, and the fact that left to ourselves, we generally can deal with these disease conditions that come along. Story coming on out, actually it's a YouTube video where members of the GOP are drafting a new bill that will fire Dr. Anthony Fauci and launch a criminal investigation into just what part the United States had in funding the Wuhan virology laboratory from which COVID-19 is thought to have escaped. Turning to the international news now, we talked earlier in the week about how the United States is approaching Russia, about strategic talks that Putin and Biden were going to talk. But already we're hearing from TASS that the United States wants to narrow the agenda on the talks on strategic stability. This is according to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and after negotiations with his Azerbaijani counterpart, Ceyhun Bayramov, yesterday. So they're already pulling back on that deal as well. Over in Ukraine, and this is a little alarming that they're saying this kind of thing, the Ukrainian president does not rule out a new world war in the conflict with Russia. We have to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Now, Lockheed Martin has announced they are removing some of their contractors working on the maintenance of F-16 fighter jets at an Iraqi military base out of security concerns. This is Balad Air Base, which is north of Baghdad, It's been a target of frequent rocket attacks that U.S. officials believe are carried out by the usual Iranian-backed militia. They don't really know, but Iran is always going to make a convenient fall guy. So Lockheed is pulling their contractors out. They have not responded to any request for a comment on the situation. Now, over in Iran, they're rejecting claims by the Pentagon of harassment in the Strait of Hormuz. They're rejecting claims that Iranian boats harassed U.S. warships in the strait, an incident that led to a U.S. Coast Guard cutter firing 30 warning shots. And Pentagon spokesman John Kirby claimed Monday the Iranian vessels had been acting very aggressively, but the IRGC said its patrol vessels encountered the U.S. warships during routine daily missions in the territorial waters. The Coast Guard cutter was accompanied by 6 U.S. Navy ships, including a guided missile submarine, and somehow felt threatened by these Iranian vessels, which are basically glorified ski boats, with a machine gun on the front here. So they're a little timid there with all the weapons they have. And here's an article that's asking the same thing I was. This is from 1945.com, and it's asking, why aren't U.S. Navy warships and Coast Guard boats anywhere near Iran? Because we certainly don't see Iranian warships in, for example, the Gulf of Mexico. We don't see them off the coast of Florida. We don't see them off the coast of California. So what is the United States doing, pressing so close to Iranian coastal waters? So the U.S. Navy reported on that incident from last week. The Iranian vessels failed to exercise due regard for the safety of other vessels as required under international law in international waters. Now, of course, Iran is saying they were following all the rules. But, the question is, why risk these close calls at all? What is the whole point of all this U.S. firepower off the coast of Iran? It's not going to do anything except exacerbate tensions. Over in Kuwait, in their largest oil field, a fire started on Monday. It's injured 2 workers, and the injured workers were in stable condition and receiving treatment at a hospital. The blaze at the Great Bergen Field in the southeastern district of Kuwait that produces over 1.6 million barrels of oil a day did not impact production, but it certainly lit up the sky. Over in France, Marine Le Pen is warning Macron of the dangers of civil war if he doesn't handle the Islamist problem. Now, this is the same thing that all of these French generals were warning about, and which led to them being shamed and so how dare you say that. But the controversy is being stoked when Marine Le Pen, dubbed by the corporate media as France's outspoken leader of the far right, once again showed support for the letter by agreeing on the danger of a civil war in an apparent rallying of her base around that message ahead of next April's election, where they'll seek to take on President Emmanuel Macron. And the polls have them running neck and neck right now. Over in Norway, a nuclear-powered American submarine, Virginia-class, has docked at a civilian port, sparking concerns among protesters who say the deployment could turn the city into a bomb target in the event of a war. The USS New Mexico submarine arrived in Tonsnes Municipal Harbor on Monday. Now, the Norwegian government imposed a no-fly zone over the port, strictly guarding access to the harbor under tight security. And people gathered at the port to protest the submarine's presence. They held banners that read U.S. out of Norway and no nukes in Tromsø. So there they are. All right. Let's talk about the economic news. First of all, the Dow Industrial had a really bad day today. They were down, I think it was 672 the last time I looked. And yeah, they had a bad day. There's an article coming on out from Tethasta.com, and it's called Bidenomics, and it's talking about how inflation is rising more than expected in April and is in the fastest pace since 2008. So we'll be back after. And welcome back to our show. Here we're talking about the economic news. We're talking about the rate of inflation, which is a lot worse than people were expecting. And inflation in April accelerated at its fastest pace in more than 12 years. Energy prices jumped higher. The consumer price index rose 4.2% from a year earlier. It had been expected there was only going to be a 3.6% increase. And the increase in the annual headline consumer price index rate was the fastest September 2008, while the monthly gain in core inflation was the largest since 1981. This is not looking good. Article at Investment Watch blog is suggesting that gold may be headed to $2,900 an ounce. So you're going to be glad you bought in when it was a lot less. Another story, this one is coming out of WomenSystems.com. Half of the 100 largest U.S. employers of low-wage workers rigged the CEO pay to increase their compensation while cutting worker salaries and laying off staff during the pandemic, according to a new study. These were 100 of the S&P 500 firms. They had the lowest median worker wages, and 51 of them bent their own rules in 2020 to pump up executive paychecks. So greed is running rampant. Now, Joe Biden and the Democrats are out there talking about taxing the rich, and that always sounds really good, especially to the poor and middle class who are feeling they're taxed too much. But the problem with that is the wealthy have the means to move. And as Biden and the Democrats go on the war path to tax the richest Americans, hedge fund managers are starting to expand their operation into Puerto Rico, opening the possibility of relocating to the island to obtain huge tax breaks. And we're seeing that a lot of very wealthy individuals from high tax places like New York, they're starting to find low tax places to move to, like Salt Lake City or here in Santa Claus. And so, yeah, that's going to be the problem. The rich can always find a way to evade being taxed. It's us poor people who are more or less stuck where we are that are having to deal with it. And you know, we're cursed with having a government that never once in the last 100 years has been able to stay within its budget, to only spend that which it has coming on in. In fact, the last president to actually pay off the national debt and balance the budget was Andrew Jackson, and he shut down a private central bank in order to be able to do that, at which point there was an attempt on his life. Story coming on out of Station Gossip. There are 8 million job vacancies, the most since 2000, but employers are saying they're having a hard time finding people to take those jobs. And I guess the robot revolution that was going to take those jobs is too expensive. And the finger is being pointed at all of the various pandemic handouts that make it, more lucrative to stay at home collecting the handouts than going on out and getting a job. Plus, you're dealing when you go out with getting a job. There's, the driving, they're getting ready for the job. Employers who don't really have the best of attitude toward their workers. You're dealing probably with minimum wage, no benefits, and it's hard to really be enthusiastic about that. So that's part of the problem as well. Turning to immigration and globalism, over in the European Union, Michel Barnier has called for a 3 to 5 year suspension of all immigration into EU countries, warning that the bloc's external borders have become a sieve for criminals and terrorists. And Barnier told French media, I think we have to take time for 3 or 5 years to suspend immigration. And Barnier was the EU's former Brexit negotiator, and he cited links between immigration and terrorist networks that infiltrate migration flows as part of his reasoning for calling on the shutdown. I think it's a really, really good idea, especially when you look at all these warnings about a possible civil war in France. Okay. Over in Germany, Catholic churches are defying the Pope and offering blessings to gay couples. This is being done in protest over the Vatican's refusal to approve same-sex partnerships. And this is a contentious issue for a lot of religions. Believe it or not, the Methodists may be coming up on a break where the Methodist Church is going to break into 2 new denominations over that issue of gay marriage. And so we'll see what's going to happen with that one. On Monday, the Biden administration's Health and Human Services Department announced that the Office for Civil Rights would throw out Donald Trump's view that sex is biological and interpret and enforce Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act and Title IX's prohibitions on discrimination based on sex to include discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and the basis of gender identity. So the Biden administration has now signed on to this idea that gender is non-biological. It's basically whatever you decide you want it to be. And, that's certainly not reality. Okay, story coming on out of military.com. More than 7 months after the official launch of the Army Combat Fitness Test, nearly half of female soldiers are still falling short, with enlisted women struggling the most. And military.com has learned the data again raises questions about whether the Army's attempt to create a fitter force is creating more barriers to success for women. Okay, I'm sorry, but the women are failing the test. Males are passing easily because males are physically stronger overall, and all the politics and wishful thinking and wokeness are not going to change that. So internal Army figures from April show 44% of the women failed the test compared to 7% of men since October 1st. And female soldiers continue to lag male soldiers in all events. Now, that's not saying that women can't do well in mechanized war, driving tanks, flying airplanes, operating ships. But in terms of warfare that requires physical strength, like infantry work, carrying ammo, it's just not going to work. Over at the Mickey Mouse place, Disney, they have been caught indoctrinating their employees with critical race theory and a white privilege checklist. This is coming from a newly leaked employee training manual. The Walt Disney Company is pushing critical race theory on its employees, including lectures on race and white privilege and how America is founded on systemic racism. And apparently Disney's diversity and inclusion program called Reimagine Tomorrow is deeply politicized and engulfs parts of the company in racial conflict. Not going very well. Speaking of diversity, the NBC has dumped the broadcast of the Golden Globes for next year complaining that it has a lack of diversity. Tom Cruise supposedly returned his 3 Golden Globe Awards, and the list of celebrities boycotting the Hawaii Foreign Press Association and its awards is growing. And part of the problem is that the Hawaiian Foreign Press Association has no black members. Well, maybe it's just not a job that they wanted. What can I tell you? Up in Washington State, their Governor Jay Inslee has signed into law a bill that mandates the teaching of critical race theory in public schools. And so, unlike so many other states that have now banned it, Washington State is now mandating it. Over in Wisconsin, they are now requiring Holocaust education, or Holocaust mythology, if you will, starting in the 5th grade. This was a bill signed Wednesday by Governor Tony Evers, actually a week ago, and it mandates that lessons about the Holocaust and other genocides be included in social study classes at least once between 5th and 8th grade, and once again in high school. All right. Evers signed the bill at the offices of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation, which advocated for the bill. Imagine my shock. Over at the Virginia Military Institute, they're going to take down a statue of Stonewall Jackson, who was a Confederate. He played an integral part in the Civil War. And they're committing a Soviet-style purge, basically reattributing Stonewall Jackson's quotes to other people who never said them. And that is really getting out there, I think. All righty. The Biden administration, is looking to expand gun control in a very sneaky way. And they're basically looking at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to update the legal definition of firearm in an effort to crack down on so-called ghost guns. The proposed rule seeks to redefine frame or receiver and classify more firearm kits as complete firearms, making them subject to more regulation and oversight. It also seeks to legally define terms such as complete muffler or silencer device, as well as privately made firearms. So they're coming for the guns here. Over in Arizona, Governor Doug Ducey has signed into law a bill that designates gun stores as essential businesses, allowing them to remain open during an emergency. And this will protect gun stores, manufacturers, and trade associations from lawsuits. The new law, Senate Bill 1382, introduced by Republican Senator Wendy Rogers, applies to any store selling guns or ammunition or their components and mirrors federal law that was passed on a bipartisan basis. Okay, little bit of good news here. And I guess they must have been listening to Newt Gingrich the other day. China has sentenced 2 computer hackers to death. The sentence was imposed on the brothers Hao Jinglong and Hao Jingwen, who hacked their way into a state-owned bank and transferred money into secret accounts. One of the brothers was a bank accountant. And the judge in Zhejiang, Jiangsu province, said the hacking was a new form of crime and should not be treated lightly. I am absolutely in agreement. The total sum the hackers obtained was 260,000 renminbi, which is roughly 21,000 British pounds. A large sum by Chinese standards. The sentence is considered unusually severe. But the judge said this is out there to send a warning to deter the growth of computer crime. And China is showing increased concern about loopholes in its computer systems, which are being exploited both by political dissidents and for financial fraud. And I got to tell you, I don't have a problem with this. Considering how much damage cyber criminals are causing to our nation, I think stricter punishment for those that we can actually track down is definitely called for. I mean, especially after this Colonial Pipeline shut down and all the harm it has caused. By the way, somebody actually sent me a video from Twitter of somebody filling up a plastic shopping bag with gasoline, and I mean, that's one of the stupidest things that you can do. I remember when there was a gas shortage many years ago, and there was this story about how somebody set up a 50-gallon drum in their home and put gasoline in there, and of course the inevitable happened. A spark hit it and their house burned down. Alrighty. Pennsylvania State University, in the spirit of woke, has passed a resolution calling for an end to male-specific terms like freshman and senior. And they want to remove underclassmen and upperclassmen. They're being retired in the name of inclusivity, and I wonder what they're planning on replacing them with. Here in Indiana, the town of Mooresville has declared itself officially a sanctuary for both the First and Second Amendments, good for the citizens of Mooresville. A lot of good stuff happening here in Indiana. Free speech campaigners are welcoming Boris Johnson's war on woke after the Prime Minister reveals that the cancel culture victims denied platforms by universities can now seek compensation in the courts. And this is to protect freedom of speech, and it's designed to end the so-called no platforming or deplatforming of speakers and academics on university campuses. And I think it's about time. I think it's really very, very good idea. Getting into ClimateGate here, there's a study coming on out of Germany showing that added CO2 to the atmosphere has led to 14% more vegetation over the past 100 years. Carbon dioxide, far from being the toxic pollutant it was declared to be by the U.S. government, is essential for plant growth. And the more CO2 is in the atmosphere, the more plants will grow, and the more CO2 they will then suck out of the air. And so this study is basically confirming that mechanism is definitely working. All right, we got to take another break for commercials. Back with the news after these. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about science, the environment, and so forth. And back in 2016, there was a project founded called the Trillion Trees Project. It was founded to protect and restore forests worldwide. They have finally concluded that nearly 145 million acres of forests have grown back globally in 21 years, and they are absorbing more carbon dioxide than the entire output of the United States. And so that's the way that you deal with carbon dioxide and human-caused global warming, is you plant plants. It's an easy solution, but of course, the people pushing ClimateGate, they wanted carbon taxes and they wanted control over your life, and they weren't interested in the simple, obvious, and easy solution. Another story, this one coming out of Natural News, that human-caused global warming has kind of fizzled out. Nobody responds to it anymore. So the new scare word is ocean acidification. And it's another global warming conspiracy theory that appears to be the latest hoax of the climate change cult. And this analysis is showing scientists are blowing the whistle on massive coordinated data manipulation and fraud. At least 22 different research papers may contain manipulated data, and one published in the journal Science and the other in Nature Climate Change certainly do. And we talked about this in the early days of human-caused global warming when there was the ClimateGate revelations from the University of East Anglia from the Hadley Climate Research Unit, which admitted they were fudging the data to sell the idea that humans were warming the planet. Okay. Now, Bayer Monsanto, and I'm sure Bayer by now is having buyer's remorse over that deal, they are trying to block Mexico's phase out of glyphosate and their ban on GMO corn, and so far they have failed to do so. And life used to be a lot easier for Bayer Monsanto, but that was before they bought Monsanto for $66 billion, and now worth just $53 billion, which is $13 billion less than what it paid for Monsanto in 2018. Bayer is facing tens of thousands of lawsuits claiming that the glyphosate in Roundup weed killer causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And the company has agreed to pay as much as $11.5 billion with a B to resolve existing U.S. litigation. And still, they want to go on selling glyphosate and GMO corn around the world, which has led to the current conflict with Mexico. Mexico wants the stuff to go away, and Monsanto Bayer want to keep on selling it. Okay, we got to take a break for station identification. We're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines, area code 512-248-8252, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, area code 512-248-8252, and we're going to start with Kelly in Austin. Hello, Kelly. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
And I heard your comments about the Catholic Church in Germany going astray. I lived there. That's coming primarily out of Berlin. I guarantee Berlin was the Sodom and Gomorrah of Europe in the 1920s.
Yeah, I remember. 30s. Yeah.
Yeah. One other thing after this, but what I want to tell you is that what you see happening now in the Catholic Church, I didn't grow up in the Catholic Church. I grew up Episcopalian, the old-fashioned Anglo-Catholic Episcopalian / Anglican Church. There was practically no difference between the two. But there's a theologian / religious historian named James Hickok from St. Louis University years ago who wrote a book on liturgy. And what he says in his book is that when Vatican II, the Catholic Church transformed its liturgy from what he called a vertical rite to a horizontal rite. So it became one that emphasized social connections rather than a transcendent connection between man and God.
Okay.
And that happened in the Episcopal Church too, because later on we abandoned the 1928 Book of Common Prayer in favor of the 1979 BCP, and that essentially adopted a horizontal rite. And that's what many of us just abandoned the Episcopal Church as well. And it's at that point when you see a lot of people becoming disgruntled with their churches, the Catholic Church and the Episcopal Church, and people moving on to other churches as well, because those churches became more concerned about social justice and social welfare than the things that kept the churches, made the churches what they were over long periods of time. Now, I'm a staunch scientist, and I grew up again Episcopalian, and I still quote from the 1920 Book of Common Prayer very affectionately, and but it really bothered me to see the church like that abandon much of what made it what it was, and the Catholic Church as well. And so what I see now in both of those churches with the obsession with homosexual rights and whatever else doesn't surprise me, because that's a direct result of what Hickok said was a transition from this vertical right to a horizontal right. Back then, when they began to say sometime during the Catholic liturgy and then in the Episcopal liturgy after that, you turn to the neighbor, the guy next to you, and you grant him a sign of peace. That wasn't in the rubrics of the Mass. That was something that somebody just imposed. Anyway, so that's my comment here. The other thing I want to tell you was your comment about CO2 and plant growth.
Yes.
Yes, plant growth is directly related to CO2 in the atmosphere, and I'm not surprised to hear that plant growth has accelerated with the increase in CO2. And that's something that should be of great concern to many of these people who are concerned about global welfare and life around the globe. We are now at 21% oxygen, 12% oxygen. And if they succeed in driving it down much below that, what will happen is that, and I've told you this before, you will stress systems, plant systems and animal systems around the globe, and you will see mass extinctions because of that. So they should be striving to make sure that we don't do things to drive down the production of oxygen by driving down CO2 in the atmosphere. Again, CO2 is plant food, and we need to have stable growth of plants, land plants, marine plants around the world, in order to make sure that life on Earth, as we know it, is sustained. And if we lose that CO2 and we lose and you get down to there's a point, I guess about 140 ppm atmospheric ppm. That's when you can no longer sustain oxygen production, because photosynthesis is very difficult to maintain. And without photosynthesis, again, you're not producing enough oxygen in the atmosphere to sustain life, surface life, and marine life as we know it.
You're not producing food plants.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so these idiots, these politicians like John Kerry running around talking about, trying to eliminate the production of carbon. So you want to make sure that there's a real mass extinction around the globe.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you get when you put people like John Kerry, people who have no background in science, people like Al Gore, who had one science course in his entire life in college.
And he just barely passed that one.
Yeah, he did. He barely passed that one. And you have this Ocasio-Cortez moron and others who are just they're reading things that they don't really understand. They don't understand science. Period. They don't understand the scientific method. They don't understand chemistry, atmospheric chemistry, gas chemistry, and they're out there before the public making pronouncements as though they know what they're talking about. And you have millions of people out there who have no background in science who are fooled by that, and so they think, well, he really sounds like he knows what he's talking about. We have to follow him. Fine, like lemmings over a cliff. Good.
Yes.
So if you follow John Kerry and that moron Ocasio-Cortez, what's going to happen is that you're really going to trigger a mass extinction around the globe. I mean, a mass extinction, long term. Okay, I've said what I had to say. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks for the call. We're going to switch over to Joe in Nome, Alaska. Hello, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
That last caller, why do you let people go on and lecture you like that? And you just sit there going, Listen.
Why? Because he's making sense.
Oh, no. His premise was wrong from the beginning. Okay? Look, ocean acidification does not result from global warming. It is the other way around. The oceans get heated up and release their carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Russian ice cores have proved this, that the oceans heat up before the carbon dioxide. No. When you open,
yeah, but Al Gore had it reversed in his presentation in his mockumentary, An Inconvenient Truth.
Well, so the whole point about planting trees and all this baloney is, look, the anthropogenic component, you can just throw it in the trash.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
It has no effect. The Earth's climate is dictated by its orbit, and
yes,
whatever.
I agree.
Okay, you heard about the latest from Iceland, 1,000-foot high geyser out of a new vent or what have you call it, and tourism is off the charts.
Oh yeah.
Look. Okay. Well, how long does it take for that solar storm that NASA was predicting to get to Earth? About a week. Now, they put out a warning about it a week before that new vent opened up. That just goes to show
I don't think they're linked. I don't think they're linked to each other. And I mean, there's the coronal mass ejection, and that's the first heads up that something is coming. And I think actually that the enhanced solar wind sort of came through here end of last week. It's already come and gone.
Well, listen, the magnetic field is all over. Our magnetic field is all over the place right now.
Yes,
it's breaking up here and there. All these cosmic rays are bombarding our planet's core. That's part of it, but still, it's dictated by the sun. The sun is what was supposed to protect us from all those cosmic rays. But anyway, I had an interesting thought before I made this call. I was boiling my CO2 content here.
Okay.
But is there a radioactive component of carbon? Because that's what we're going to end up with all this carbon coming out of the ocean acidification, along with Fukushima. What's the radioactive form of carbon? You can look there for your next...
Well, there's carbon-12, and then there's carbon-14, and the difference between them is used as an aging measurement. And I don't know about any severely radioactive carbon isotopes.
Well, speaking of the carbon-14, with these cycles that we go through, wouldn't you think that they'd have to adjust all of those figures of carbon-14 for the variable amounts of carbon-14 that the Earth receives? It's not constant.
No, that's why they measure a ratio of the carbon-14 to the carbon-12. And it's from that they get the age of the organic material being tested.
But if there's more carbon-14 being created during episodes like we have going right now, which is a fact, well, then that would throw the timing off. Forget about the ratios.
Well, that's not the way that I understand that it works. It's almost irrelevant how much carbon the sample starts out with. It's just over time, the ratio between those two isotopes is a constant.
Well, no, it wouldn't be. You got two different sources.
No, you don't.
How could they become?
The carbon is taken in, by biological processes, and then over time it begins to split into the two different types of isotopes. Okay,
right now we got a total buildup of carbon. Forget about, it's going to end up in your body. Sure.
Yes.
Anyway, on this other thing with the Avril Haines DNI.
Yeah.
She's been scrubbing her Brookings page. One of the things she scrubbed was her former association with Palantir, a major data mining operation.
Yes.
And she was making, there was a story out of the Independent I was reading about this, but there's other stuff too. Her Brookings page shows a picture of her, and it blew me away. It almost looked like Jodie Foster. But my sister doesn't want to blame all this stuff on women, so she thinks that the Avril is really a tranny. Anyway.
Well, who knows here. Anyway, Joe, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. And Kelly in Austin called back in with a counter argument to what Joe was saying. So, Kelly, why don't you hop on in and let us know what you think?
Yeah, well, okay. I'm going to run on my background in geochemistry. I'm a doctorate in geochemistry. Your last caller is woefully misinformed about carbon chemistry and CO2. The one thing I've told you before, that CO2 is released from the oceans when the ocean's warm. I don't know where you got that. I might have informed you otherwise, but I remember telling you, if you go back and you look at the data from the Vostok ice cores and then from the Greenland ice cores, that's exactly what you see. Warming of the oceans and then subsequent release of CO2.
Yeah, but Al Gore flipped that for his documentary to make it look like the CO2 happened first and then the warming happened.
Well, yes, he did, but we all know what Al Gore's background in science is, and so I'm going to ignore Al Gore. He's not an expert in anything. About carbon-14, carbon-14 is a naturally occurring radioactive isotope of carbon is generated in the upper atmosphere from the splitting of a nitrogen-15 nucleus into a carbon-14 and to a tritium and into a deuterium. So what happens now is the way you get carbon-14 dating is you measure the carbon-14 in a sample and you compare that with the global standard now called modern carbon. And what you get is a ratio of percent of modern carbon. So you take a sample, for example, of bone or water or whatever else, and then you get a carbon-14 signature in that, and the signature in that, based upon the signature in a modern global standard, is called percent of modern carbon. And the degree of deterioration over time is based upon the deterioration, or what you see, the decrease in a carbon-13, which is a stable isotope of carbon. And so when we attempt to measure the age of something, we do that based upon comparison of the carbon-13 and carbon-14 ratios with modern carbon to come up with an estimated age of something. Now, there are a lot of things that can interfere with that, because in water systems in particular, the carbon system is really subject to changes because of rock-water interaction, or in the case of something like bone, then you have other things that can affect that. But it's always compared with a measurement of modern carbon-14 activity in samples around the world. There's nothing mysterious about that. Nobody's trying to jack around with anything. It's well-established science. It goes back more than 70 years, and it's something that it's done millions of times around the world, and it's repeatable. Now, going back to the issue about CO2 in the ocean, again, I've told you before on more than one occasion that when the oceans warm up, you get the release of CO2. Where this guy comes from, claiming that I or anybody else might have said that, I have no idea. I've never said that, and I think he really needs to spend some time in a real science class before he starts claiming that somebody else doesn't really understand what he's talking about. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Mark, thank you for waiting all this time. And what is on your mind?
Hey, Mike, what's going on? Hey, listen, I found you on RBN,
Yes.
On your radio. So I'm glad I got you back there. So anyway, I don't know if you heard today, I another show early this morning, and evidently there's a letter out from retired military officers, mostly generals and admirals, kind of similar to what the French did, a few weeks ago, the French officers, and then about, a bunch of other French officers, enlisted men afterwards warned active duty. So far, these are retired officers, pretty much, warning this government, it's got to get its act together. It's not doing right. It's not doing right by the people. Not doing right for the Constitution or for this country.
Yes.
Now, I wonder, we're going to, if like France, we're going to get active duty officers and soldiers, enlisted men also.
We very well might. And what's important about this letter that came on out, because we did talk about it earlier in the program, it also casts doubt on the honesty of the November 2020 election, and it calls into question Joe Biden's mental acuity.
Yes, you're right. I remember that part from the letter earlier too. I didn't know you discussed it. I didn't know you knew about it. Because not hearing about it too much on any of the news. This to me is it's kind of a veiled warning. Get your act together, or else. Now I think that or else should have come into playing already. I think the military owes it as patriots. They're supposed to be patriots, supposed to want to defend this country from domestic and foreign enemies. But we've got domestic enemies that are taking hold of this country, and I think they should have already acted. I mean, the damage this scumbag is doing I'm talking about Biden and his cohorts are doing to this country is almost beyond repair.
Okay, Mark, I'm going to have to put you on hold. Don't hang up. Okay. I'm going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. Welcome back to our show here. And again, a quick reminder that Republic Broadcasting Network needs your continuing support so that we can go on doing what we've been doing all these years, which is keeping the American people fully informed so that they can make good choices. Once again, the postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation is 800-724-2719, extension 3. And a reminder that if you send in a donation of $100, you will get your choice of an RBN coffee mug or an official RBN T-shirt. So send along your T-shirt size and a return address. I understand we're running short on those T-shirts, so if you want one, you better move quickly on that. And if you send in a donation of $115 or more, you will get both the cup and the T-shirt. And don't forget the Front Sight Firearms deal, because that is a really, really sweet deal. Okay, we're going to go back to the phones. We're talking with Mark in North Carolina, and you were talking about his fraudulency, Joe Biden.
Yeah, what's happening now with these pipelines, I don't believe for a minute this is a Russian or any other kind of a hack from the outside. I think this is
this is just more, Russia bashing, any excuse they can do. Yeah.
The false flag. The CIA or somebody related to the CIA, contractors related to the CIA, hackers, did this to us. And this is terrible. I mean, this is causing people a lot of hardship.
Yes.
I saw the line backed up. They must have been for like a half a mile. All right. Fortunately, I was smart enough to fill up my car yesterday. So it's terrible. It's disgusting, Mike. They can't keep on getting away with this. The military needs to take action. The only way, the quickest way to relieve this country of this burden now would be for the military to it could probably avoid a civil war. It would be able to, especially announces that, let's say gave us 6 months to have another election. And then I'm not even talking about putting Trump back in. I blame Trump for a lot of the problems we have. He didn't do it.
He was a disappointment as president. I'm not going to argue with you about that.
Yeah, and this whole COVID stuff is pretty much, he went along with the lockdown. He went along with the emergency provision. He didn't even lift it, right up to the last minute. He kept it in place. He kept Fauci, a man who needs to go to Gitmo to be waterboarded. Now we know that Fauci was. I didn't know whether it was a biological weapon or not, but now more and more I'm realizing this was a biological weapon of some kind. And I don't necessarily think China was all behind it as much as the Fauci and his cohorts, who actually the germ started out in the University of North Carolina, of all places, and somehow made its way to Wuhan, China. So, I mean, the Wuhan lab. So there's something suspicious about that, obviously. And Trump kept this clown in there all this time. He had a guy like, what was the other guy's name? Sampson, I think his last name was. He was good, and Trump just pretty much ignored what he had to say and let Fauci keep running the show. And there's no, and then the vaccine. he's got to go down as the father of the vaccine now. He's the one who pushed it. He brags about it. He still brags about it.
Yeah.
I don't want him back in there. We need to have a new election. There should be like a coalition government managing it for 6 months, or the military itself managing it, and then we'll see. We'll see who runs and who could win. I wouldn't mind General Flynn in there as president. I wouldn't mind a guy like Colonel West or Rick DeSantis or even Tulsi Gabbard. But this is
Tulsi Gabbard is doing surprisingly well out in California. They're saying that she has a shot at the governorship.
I didn't even know she's running.
Well, neither did I, but that was on the One American News Network this morning.
Wow. I didn't even... is she a California resident now? Did she move to California?
I guess she must have, yes.
Yeah, because as far as I know, you would have to be a resident of the state to run for...
well, certainly
governor.
It's going to help, but apparently she's doing very well in the polls.
That would be great. That would be great. Yep. I'd certainly take her over. Well, I'd take her over Newsom if I lived there. I'd take her over, and I'd take her over Bruce Jenner too. I'd only go for Jenner over Newsom because Newsom is so terrible.
Yes.
In reality, I mean, come on. You don't want a guy like Jenner there, dressed up like a woman and all that. That's just not a good representative for a governor. I don't care if he does it in his own. It's his business. But I feel to be the governor.
Okay, well, Mark, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials. We got other callers waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Welcome back to our show here. The phone lines are loaded up right now, so let's go to Tom in Florida. Hello, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello? Yeah,
yes,
Mike, can you hear me?
Air. You're on the air.
Yeah, good. Yeah, good to you, Mike. Wow. Before I want to ask you a question about Mars before you let me go, Mike. But the caller, a couple calls back, the guys were talking about carbon. That's what they make diamonds out of, isn't it? Carbon's made out of diamonds.
Well, that's what diamonds are made out of, yes. Crystallized carbon.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Maybe you'll all turn into diamonds. Who knows? But anyway, listen, Mike. Here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about, the guy was talking about Jodie Foster, the lesbo Cheney got booted out today. Okay,
yes.
And now she's going to be a witch, and she's going after Trump and Trump supporters. The Liz Cheney and her crazy father, she couldn't aim right with a gun. Shot his buddy hunting. Okay, but this guy, Lesbo Cheney, is going after the Republican conservative output of the party.
Yes.
And basically, according to Breitbart, she's only got 22% of the vote if she runs again in Wyoming. She's only got 22% of the support. So she's going to get wiped out in the next election. I think Mittens Romney's going to get wiped out because he's a bumbling buffoon, too, like Biden. But, Mike, all these rhinos, they have to be extricated out of the party.
Yes.
They get extracted, They need to be extracted out of this party. We don't need no more rhinos. Got to get rid of all these filthy rhinos. And so the guy that called the last caller, you have a United States Senator named Rand Paul calling Fauci a filthy liar. Rand Paul today is all over the news saying that Fauci's a liar. He's a filthy liar. He's lying about this and that. So you got a United States Senator saying this. What kind of weight does that carry, Mike? What kind of weight does it carry when the Republicans are ousted Cheney out of there, the lesbo out of power? I mean, I think people are waking up, and maybe a lot of people are starting to listen to your show. Maybe even these trolls are freaking out because, you know what, Mike? In the end, we're going to win this thing. And you're talking about Andrew Jackson, Mike.
Yes.
The course of history would have been really changed. And even, you listen to this, William Tecumseh Sherman would have pussied out on the battlefield if you'd have came up against Jackson. He even said it. If you look at the archival papers of Sherman, William Tecumseh Sherman said the best general on the battlefield was Jackson. And if he would have met them, if they would have met on the battlefield, I believe that the South would have pulled it out. Of course, that was God's intervention, so that didn't happen. We never got to see that battle between the North and the South with those two, with even Ulysses S. Grant against Jackson. We didn't get to see that battle. Unfortunately, that didn't happen for the South. So they lost. But I believe if Jackson would have been on that battlefield as leading his troops, it would have been a whole different historical event. I don't honestly believe that. Even Tecumseh Sherman said that. So that was out of General William Tecumseh Sherman. I don't think he would have ran down to land and started burning down the South. Jackson would have survived. However, Mike, that was history, and that's just the way it is. Here's what I want to go back to now, Mike, too. We have a little thing going on here at South Florida about immigration, Mike. It's been in the Miami Herald. I don't know if you had a chance to hear about it. Well, these illegals from Venezuela that are coming through Texas, guess where they're heading to, Mike? They're heading right here to South Florida, Mike. And people are saying, what is going on? And yeah, Mike, they're coming through the Texas border. They already got like 500 of them, and a lot of them are trying to get into the Florida. Ron DeSantis knows this, the governor.
Yes.
So I think he's trying to stop it right there seal it off right on I-10 there, going into Tallahassee. Of course, he's up 10 goes right through Tallahassee. So DeSantis, the governor, and the leadership in Florida knows that these Venezuelans are sneaking into Texas and they're trying to be bussed over here. And if Biden's going to allow that to happen, DeSantis is saying, no. You're not bringing them here. They came here illegally. No coming here. And another thing, Mike, this lady who's going to take over for Cheney, Stefanik.
Yes.
I want everybody on your show to call her like I did, and I want them to bring up Title 8, Mike. Title 8 has got to be addressed right now with every one of you Republicans and these dirty Democrats, these mayors, these commissioners, these governors. I want Title 8 brought out. I want every one of your callers and to start slamming these Congress people. You're going to start enforcing the Title 8 of the Constitution. Right, Mike?
Well, Title 8 is part of the U.S. Code. It's not technically part of the Constitution. But yes, you're right. Title 8 should have been enforced all along.
Yes, and I want it enforced, Mike, and that's what this new Republican Party better start thinking about right this minute. Oh, and by the way, Mike, we are having gas lines because of the problem they had with the hacking. So there's a bunch of gas lines here in South Florida. I couldn't believe all these cars lined up for blocks. It's unbelievable. It's unreal what's going on now all of a sudden. And wait till the price goes up to $5-6 and something goes, oh, by the way, Mike, Israel. All these schmucks that voted for Biden, they said they shot off 700 rockets in Israel, the Palestinians, according to what the news network is saying. All these rockets are landing in the Israel. Okay, whatever. Anyway, now, Mike, here's what I'll ask you about Mars in a second. But another thing I want to bring up too, Mike. Right now, McCarthy has a great shot now, according to all these, even CNN's even saying Democrats could lose the House in a year and a half.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What is bumbling Biden going to do once that House is going back in Republican control? That bumbling buffoon is going to resign sooner than you think. And that Kamala Harris is going to take over, Mike. She's going to take over. And that's what this whole thing's about. And Zog is running the whole show. This is a Zog show. And Mike, also, it's being reported that Bill Gates was on the Lolita Express with Epstein, and that's why his wife left him. And he was having all these parties. He likes to watch young girls in bathing suits and bikinis and stuff. Okay, well, that's cool.
Well,
that's Billy
I
Gates.
was just going to say, I like certainly watching from afar, but Claire's not going to divorce me because of that.
Well, who knows? Well, that's what I'm saying, Mike. I think Gates was doing something more than just watching, okay? That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's what I keep hearing.
Well, look at Prince Andrew in England. Come on, what was he up to? But anyway, Mike, okay, now getting back to, the last couple of these guys were talking about carbon and all this. I want to ask you something about Mars, Mike. I want your opinion. I know you're better than all, and there's a 3,000-mile trench on Mars. What's the name of that trench, Mike?
Valley Marineris.
Yes, exactly. I saw it, right. I can't remember the name. Now, they were talking, if they could drop in carbon monoxide machines down in the basin, and I believe that thing's, 4 miles deep, Mike?
Yeah, something like that. It's a big crack. I mean, it makes the Grand Canyon, look kind of like tiny.
It looks like a pimple. No, the Grand Canyon, they say, compared to this thing, looks like a pimple. Because this thing's over 3,000 miles long. And they had this guy on that said if they were to drop like 150 of these machines they have, I guess NASA's working on them, they could actually make carbon monoxide go up into the atmosphere of Mars and make it start raining. So if they would flood that canyon for 3,000 miles and there's moisture in there, there's life all over Mars, Mike. I mean, I think the life would be teeming.
Well, I don't think you're talking about carbon monoxide, which is highly toxic. They're maybe talking about carbon dioxide. I mean, there's already a lot of carbon dioxide on Mars. Those polar caps are mostly dry ice, And what you see around the Landers and Viking 1 that looks like snow is a mixture of water and dry ice. But I think the idea is if they could thicken up the atmosphere, that yes, they could start a humidity cycle going. They are convinced now that there is a considerable amount of water on Mars, but it's below ground level.
Yeah. They were saying they could seed it. They would be able to seed it, Mike. Mike, that canyon is interesting also in the fact that how come they don't talk about NASA landing like a rover or the vehicle, what's it like in a mile or 2 miles from that crater, so they could actually go over to the crater and measure, to actually what's going on in there, get real good photographs or something. Because I honestly believe, and I heard this a couple of years back, they're growing like in these labs or whatever, Mike, algae, like an algae that makes oxygen.
Yes.
There's an algae that's so powerful. Yeah, but I believe the Israelis are working on that, where the algae that makes, like they got a couple calls way back talking about oxygen. Well, I believe if you have this right algae and you were to seed that whole canyon maybe for 3,000 miles, you might have some more pure oxygen on Mars better than here.
Well, the problem is you are going to have enough water to support the algae and, enough material for it to feed on, to get that cycle going. Even all the way back during the Viking mission, we were talking about let's plump a spacecraft right down to the bottom of that canyon system because you're going to have a much thicker atmosphere. You're more likely to find water. You're more likely to find life. But the thought is it's too dangerous down there, that the bottom of the canyon is too rough and rocky, and they would have to have something that could fly down there and reconnoiter for a safe place to land, which is certainly within the technology today. Okay, I guess we lost Tom. So let's switch over to Kelly. No, we already did Kelly. Let's go to Peter in Los Angeles. Hello, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Hello? There we are.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. What's on your mind?
I wanted to talk about, I think Mark talked about it earlier, about the military intervening in politics. And
yes.
I talked about something earlier in the week about nobody being allowed the executive order that Biden had about Russia, where you can't advocate for them, even in a newspaper, for instance. Certainly within the military, whatever. Which means that we're on a collision path for war.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a contrary position then. In order to make that fly, they have to purge the officer corps, and they're purging it. And I would tell you that the one institution, we have the CIA that has a director that's a chosen person. Our whole government is just permeated with them. But we still had a military that the rank and file and the majority of the officer corps throughout the services were basically white. And now we have this gentleman named Bishop Garrison, who is a black woke guy who is on basically a woke witch hunt. And his charter is to expose and expel all the MAGA and anybody who might have a political opinion dissenting from Joe Biden and the Democrats, and frankly from the Jews as well.
Yes,
it's the last institution that will not be basically controlled by us that has real import, and that will be, and we're going to be losing that to this like a woke commissar, like the Soviet Union had during the Second World War. And that's what's going on. Of course, the hell with the defense of the country, the hell with the people who've who've invested their careers and lives and have done nothing wrong, except have what until recently was a completely acceptable political opinion. But all that is gone, and that's my That's my comment today. But it's gone. No longer will be able to be militarily effective. But that's the way it's going to be. And we're talking about a civil war. Well, we won't win anything. We want to win a war, a civil war.
No, everybody loses in these things here. And, I know the idea of a military takeover is scary. But on the other hand, all of the military people I have ever known are strict constitutionalists. So I'm not 100% opposed to the idea. Anyway, Peter, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. And we're going to switch to Layla in Canada. And Layla, hello. Welcome to the show. And welcome to RBN. Before you get into your call, would you share with our listeners exactly when they can tune into your new program here on the Republic Broadcasting Network?
Thank you, Michael. Yes, John Stadtmiller has very graciously allowed me to try out a show. It'll start on Sunday night, 9 Central. Thanks to Steve Elkins, who's been so generous with his intelligence and his generosity with his talent. I've arrived at one title for the show that he recommended, among others, and that is A Call to Patriots. So that'll be Sunday night is the first one. It'll start off very badly. I don't have the equipment I need, but we just wanted to get started ASAP. Thank you for that opportunity. And also, I'd like to thank Kelly for his phone calls. I find him extremely informative, and I think it's unfair to describe him as lecturing because he's very respectful in the way he talks to you.
Yes.
And on the subject of Israel, let's remember that Israel is in the midst of its 5th election in 2 years. This eruption of violence could be a distraction, but the other side also has to recognize its limitations and to constantly incite or respond to incitements by Israel, whoever is doing it, endangers the world in general. And let's not blame the Jews who are amongst us, who are civilians. Let's not let one more issue add to the toxic hostilities that already have dampened the spirit of America. So, again, thank you, John Stadtmiller. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Michael Rivero. You're the role model I'm going to have in mind that I will try desperately to emulate. I didn't appreciate how difficult your task is until I put myself in a position of just trying to plan a 1-hour show. So thank you to all. And I'm so privileged. I feel privileged to be invited into the RBM community. I'll let you go. Hopefully there are other callers who can talk now.
Well, there are other callers, and again, welcome aboard and good luck. And that's Sunday night at 9 p.m. Central Time, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, all right. We're going to switch over to Joe in Nome. He called back in, and apparently he has a comment for Kelly. Joe, take it away.
Ouch, my balls. No, hey, yeah, Kelly in Austin, I'm running on a generator up here, and I stepped out for a minute to turn the generator off. It makes a lot of noise. I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay. Joe, I'm going to have to put you on hold. We got to take a break for commercials. Don't hang up. Keep the generator running, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Joe in Nome, who called back on in, and I guess you have a comment about Kelly?
Well, yeah, I wanted to apologize. Like I said, I wanted to turn off the generator, and so I missed a lot of what he was saying. But apparently, we're pretty much in agreement. And to Layla, congratulations. I'm glad to hear it. I'll be sure to tune in. And at the Tom, we can't even control. Our own climate. What makes you think we're going to be able to do much about Mars? But yeah, the Valley Marineris, I was looking at that 25, 30 years ago and wondering. And furthermore, as far as ASAP Hall goes, do you know that Jonathan Swift predicted that Mars had 2 satellites 50 years before ASAP Hall ever discovered them. He even supposedly...
Moons of Barsoom.
No, they didn't talk about Barsoom and Gulliver's Travels. The Lilliputians supposedly told Gulliver. Now, whoever Jonathan Swift was, I haven't the faintest idea. We're still thinking maybe William Shakespeare was actually, what's his name, Bacon? Sir.
Yes.
But yeah, the point is, my point is to Kelly and Austin, is that there's nothing anybody can do about the carbon. There's nothing because it isn't controlled, and making us pay for it is even more ridiculous.
I agree with you on that last part, certainly. Anyway, listen, Joe, I'm going to try and squeeze one more phone call in here before the end of the show, so thank you very much. And we're going to go to Chris in Virginia. Hello, Chris. We're short on time, but what's on your mind?
Well, can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're on the air.
I was just thinking some things through, and one thing that I thought was interesting was if things get really bad, some counties might seal off roads into their counties, or completely isolate the county and just try to self-sustain. Because I think people are going to think, who are the bad guys? The big corporations, they're the bad guys. The Wawas, and I just hate to pick on Wawa, but I just got gas at Wawa. And what I'm saying is we have to figure out how to live our lives without all these big corporations.
Yes, we do. Absolutely.
So, yeah, I just wanted to say that. Great show.
Well, thank you very much here, and we're going to let you go, and we are just about out of time. So stay tuned for John Stadmiller. He's going to have Roger Landry on the program with him tonight. Please spread the word of whatreallyhappened.com. Spread the word of Republic Broadcasting. Please donate. We'll be back tomorrow, and have a good evening. Aloha, America.